All right. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. This is David Patrick here with Church of the Eternal Logos, and tonight I want to talk to you guys about facing the serpent. We're going to be getting into the Bible, the Logos, and we'll be referencing a bit of a clip I found of Jordan Peterson. So old Dr. Peterson's going to be with us in tonight's stream from a clip that I found recently of him over on the Joe Rogan, his most recent appearance over on the Joe Rogan Experience, where he's kind of dressed up in a tuxedo. And I actually haven't watched his entire... I've only seen clips on the internet, but one clip that I came across I thought was really interesting and worth... it got my brain going, and this was his discussion, brief sort of exegetical reference or understanding of Numbers chapter 21, verses 4 through 9, in which the bronze serpent is held up by Moses because the Israelites are being plagued by serpents, poisonous snakes that are biting them and killing them. And so we want to talk a little bit about and unpacking this whole bronze serpent thing. And he makes a reference about sort of clinical psychological interpretations of how you have to face your fears. And I thought this was really, really interesting because we're going to look at John 3:14, where Christ makes reference that he is that serpent that Moses had to hold up. And we can look at Christ really facing so many different quote-unquote serpents or fears. And of course, we are healed when we look at the full reality of Jesus Christ in the same way that the Israelites were healed when they cast their eyes upon the bronze serpent. And so we're going to be discussing and just kind of working through that premise today is facing the serpent. And what does this kind of tell us about bravery and the nature of healing? As I think we will come across some pretty interesting concepts. Serpent worship, anybody who's done a little bit of comparative religion or comparative mythology knows that serpents are replete through religious traditions. You can look at South Asia in the sort of Naga worship. Nagas, these sort of half serpentine, half serpent deities, if you will. If anybody's dove into Gnosticism, of which is something that I talk a lot about, you can look at Abraxas. Of course, he has the two sort of serpent feet, if you will. But you can look at traditions like the Ophites or the Sethians, who sort of are proclaimed to be continuations of serpentine worship out of Egypt. And so serpents throughout religion have occupied a really interesting status. Now, obviously, when we talk about the Bible, which we're going to be reading again, Numbers 21, 4 through 9, 2 Kings, or if you have an Orthodox Study Bible, which I hope you do, we'll be looking at 4 Kingdoms, the fourth book of Kingdoms, chapter 18, 4, where Hezekiah has to destroy the bronze serpent eventually. Because the Israelites, that thing that was that sort of faux representation, this typology, as we're going to look into, this typology of who Christ is, becomes worshipped by the Israelites. Eventually, Hezekiah, again, the king after David that kind of reorients Israel back to the true faith, he has to destroy the bronze serpent. And I have an article here that I found in just preparation for today's stream that there's actually been a lot of archaeological evidence finding bronze serpents or these serpentine relics that were worshipped in Cana, a former, the sort of the land of the Canaanites, and that is actually what is referenced in Numbers. Again, chapter 21, verses 4 through 9. So interesting that there has been archaeological evidence to show that the Canaanites indeed were worshiping serpents, and how God, through Moses, communicating with Moses, how this is all a typology of Christ. Again, so what do serpents represent? Well, in the Bible, we see the devil obviously depicted as a serpent. And serpents are often, snakes are often these sort of cunning entities. I over on the Chinese zodiac, I am in the year of the snake, if you will. And so cunningness, not that I am claiming any of these abilities, but within religion, we certainly see that snakes are often interpreted as wise creatures, cunning creatures, crafty creatures. But we also see within a biblical understanding how they're associated with chaos, they're associated with death and destruction, they're often associated with the serpent, the dragon, if you will, Satan himself. And so we can look at the Garden of Eden and see what type of phenotypic display does Satan take on there in the garden. Well, of course, it's a snake. And of course, Eve and Adam listening to Eve listening to the serpent, the snake, fall from God's grace, fall from Eden, fall from the commandment that God gave them. And so I previously just did a stream on how his story is history, and I'm going to be continuing this because we're going to be talking a lot about these archetypes, because I think there's so much to unpack as we go through the narrative here in the Bible and really look at this whole understanding of God telling the Israelites to face the serpent on the pole that Moses holds up, and how this might relate to, again, facing our fears and what bravery is, and how bravery itself is a sort of healing process, and how bravery itself is a sort of unique human characteristic, and how Christ, the Logos, the second person of the Trinity, the eternal person who incarnates as the historical person, Jesus Christ, is the source of all these archetypes, but then fully embodies them. You know, Jordan Peterson, as we'll see, still using a very secular approach to his biblical interpretation. I hope, again, God willing, I hope he and his family are getting closer to fully believing the reality, because it's like he wants to talk about these stories as actually real, and how he uses Jungian archetypal language, but then at the same time, when we read John 3:14, obviously we know John 3:16, God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son. So this whole John 3 section that Peterson's going to reference is all about actually believing in the reality of Jesus Christ. And we can see that the reality of the historical person, Jesus Christ, absolutely embodied complete bravery. And yet at the same time, he's the omnipotent second person of the Trinity, the Logos, the source of all the archetypes, but his lived experience, his lived life through kenosis, the self-limiting process of becoming a human, he also has to embody the unique characteristic of being a human, where you actually do experience fear, and then you have to use bravery in a way to face that fear. And in a sense, that's healing. And so by Christ facing the reality of his own crucifixion, and I have a whole list here of things that he had to face. And I'm not saying necessarily he's totally afraid, but we can look at the Garden of Gethsemane as a sort of pretense to him, to his humanness, God's humanness as Jesus Christ, that he had to have a sort of bravery. And in that bravery, he is the salvation of the world. He's the source of all healing. And when we look at our own lives, as we embody that archetype, as we embody that Christ-like disposition, as we carry our own crosses, we, through our own bravery and facing the serpents of our own life, can experience a sort of healing process as well. And so serpents, as I said, are throughout religion, all types of religious traditions. And of course, in the Gnostics, they reinterpreted the serpent in the Garden of Eden as Christ. This is part of sort of what we would call a Luciferian or an Illuministic form of spirituality, where Gnostic traditions, they would reinterpret Christ as the serpent, and sometimes they might make reference here to what we're talking about today. I don't think this, as we'll read in any of the footnotes in the Orthodox Study Bible, that's clearly not what the Church Fathers, clearly not what the Orthodox Church understood in regards to Christ referring to himself as that serpent that being held up on the pole. Because what I'm seeing is not that he is the serpent, or he is Satan, or he is the Luciferian spirit, or he is that serpentine voice in the Garden of Eden that gets Eve to eat the tree of knowledge because that big bad Yadaboeth, or these Gnostic interpretations of the God of the Old Testament actually being the devil, that he's getting them to pursue gnosis, enlightenment. No, it's that Christ is taking on the frailty caused by the fall itself, which is, again, sort of humanity's entrance into history itself. And so the serpent being held up is Christ, God, the second person of the Trinity, inhabiting a human body, being lifted up through the crucifixion, which is sort of like the serpent being held up on the pole. He's embodying everything he has to deal with. He's fully human. He takes on that fully human nature as well as fully divine nature. So we'll see the bronze serpent as a sort of typology of Christ, and eventually the serpent and not God is worship. So we'll see in Fourth Kingdoms or Second Kings, depending if you have a Protestant Bible or Catholic Bible. If you have a good Orthodox study Bible, which everybody should be getting at this point, it's Fourth Kingdoms, chapter 18:4, where Hezekiah has to destroy the bronze serpent because the Israelites are offering incense to the creation, to the symbol, to the typology, and not to the reality. Not to God himself. Again, and this is a common thing. We have to worship the creator, not the creation. And when we look at serpentine-style religions throughout world history, we can even look at the Gnostics. The serpents are often associated with fertility, a sort of phallic symbol, if you will, right? And so it's often associated, serpentine worship is depicted as phallic, and therefore then they worship goddesses. This is replete throughout ancient traditions. You can just look it up. But I have, again, this will be referenced in the paper that I found of various archaeologists finding tons of evidence of serpentine worship in Canaan. So, Jordan Peterson, as we're going to show, he has a very interesting interpretation of this Numbers 21 and John 3. Peterson's interpretation is, again, using a sort of clinical, psychological approach, claiming that, one of the things that psychologists always tell people in their clinical practice is that you have to face your fears. And so, again, the Israelites being plagued with these poisonous snakes, he believes that God telling Moses to lift up the bronze serpent on the pole and force the people who are sick to look at the bronze serpent and therefore be healed is a metaphor or a literal description of the fact that we have to face that which we're afraid of to actually become braver, in a sense, to heal from that which is killing us. And I think that's pretty apropos. And so, of course, when we look over at Christ and him being the ultimate serpent-like symbol being held up on the cross, again, as he's referenced in John 3:14, we see all types of serpents that Christ had to face. The betrayal from his friends, Judas, Peter denying him 3 times. Now, again, God was God and he knew that was going to happen, but at the same time, taking on a fully human nature, I mean, is that not another serpent that we all have to face? Is that not another fear that we all face, is betrayal from the people that are closest to us? What about being rejected and outcasted by your own community, of which the Jews did to Jesus, of which the Pharisees did to Christ? And so rejected and being outcasted by your own community. How many times, that's another serpent that some of us may face. Look at the world we live in now with social media and the peer pressure to assume all the right opinions so that you won't be canceled. See, in a way, this is consolidating, in a way, a society that is forcing people to fear to being rejected and outcasted from the community, the accepted narrative. Christ went against this. That's another sort of serpent that all of us can face. Christ in the real, literal story of, the second person, the Logos incarnate, that which is the source of all these archetypes, he faced that. Not believed when telling the truth. How many times do we fear that? Oh my gosh, well, if I become a truth teller, I try to do what's right, people aren't going to believe me. People won't respect me. You don't think Christ already knew that? That's another serpent that he had to face. Choosing the guilty over the innocent. Look at Barabbas. Look at how the Jews, again, especially the Pharisees, knew they would make up claims knowing Christ was innocent, yet at the same time they chose the criminal, the murderer, the thief, the political hellraiser, and Barabbas over Christ to kill him. Another serpent of fear that we all have to face. Not having material success. Christ didn't come here. He wasn't a political leader. He wasn't a military leader. And this is one of the reasons why Jews today still reject Christ, Jesus Christ, as the Messiah, because the semiotics, the matrix of symbols in which they're going to interpret the true Messiah, well, that's not what Jesus did. His was about humility. His was about being with the lowliest people, the sick. He came for the sinners, as he said. And so, intense pain and suffering. That's what the crucifixion is. Christ, again, faced that. But it's all for the healing, right? He faced all these serpents for the healing of the world. Similar, again, typology with that bronze serpent back in the book of Numbers. Intense pain and suffering. Sacrificing oneself for the group. You can't come up, again, Christ, if you even want to limit it to a sort of narrative, it's a limit narrative. You can't describe something more expansive, more self-sacrificial than being crucified on a cross, again, through all these different serpents, again, all these different things that we fear happening, and at the same time, sacrificing oneself for the sins of the world, dying for everything that you didn't do. We're talking about a human person, fully God, fully human, did not sin, and yet he dies for every single person's sin, going back to Eve herself when she listened to the serpent. And so she maybe faced the serpent, but then she fell victim to it. Christ faces the serpent, and then he defeats it. His death on the cross defeats death itself, the ultimate source of healing. And so one of the takeaways also we can look at Christ and the sort of serpents he had to face is that he was threatened by the most powerful authorities at the time, the Roman Empire, the Jewish Pharisees, and yet he didn't back down. And the same thing is going to happen to us. So, of course, it is very symbolic. Jordan Peterson's take on this whole narrative, he doesn't really get into the sort of spiritual reality of this whole thing, which is really the foundation of it all. When we look at the sort of psychological semiotics or the narrative tropes and motifs, well, these are certainly strappings that sort of hitch themselves to the spiritual reality and foundation that this story is from. And so he fails, as we'll see, to sort of proudly believe. And that is even referenced back in Mark, I believe, 16, talking about the sort of great commission of the apostles and how they will be able to handle serpents even if they're poisonous and not die. Again, then you see the some of the evangelicals, the sort of snake handlers here in the U.S., some of the Protestant forms of Christianity take this very literally. But Peterson kind of fails to actually believe in the reality of this whole thing. So the Logos, which is ultimately, again, the second person of the Trinity, that which incarnates as the historical person, Jesus Christ, within space and time, it is the source of the archetypes. And at the same time, we're going to see in the life of Christ the full archetype of what it means to face all these various serpents, which is the process of bravery itself. And when we look at our own culture, we're looking on a lack of bravery. In a sense, we are the Israelites. We are in a sort of spiritual desert in the 21st century. We are craving God to some degree, and of course, we're being given false forms of it. But we're being killed by poisonous serpents, just like the Israelites. And it's due to us turning our backs on God, and of course, for them, God and Moses. We could say for us, God and Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ is God, but we can see how even Moses, read the book of John, the Gospel of John is, Christ is the sort of, Moses himself is a sort of typology of who the Logos incarnate is. And so the Logos is the source of all these archetypes. History, as I said in my last stream, if you didn't catch it, go make sure you watch my stream. His story is history. that the entire process of history itself and every archetypal understanding, whether it be the archetype of motherhood, okay, embodied within the Theotokos, again, that metaphysical structure rooted within the second person of the Trinity, the Logos. Embodied is Jesus Christ incarnating inside historical time, so that which aided in the creation of the world enters its own creation. This is actually a unique religious claim. You don't see this everywhere in world religion, but that's the claim that Christianity is making, is that the second person of a triune God, the Logos, incarnates into its own creation as a human through the Theotokos. And we can see again, as I think Jordan Peterson references, even that is a sort of bravery of her taking on the will of God, accepting the insemination from the Holy Spirit there, and giving Christ his humanity through Mary. So the Logos is the source of all archetypes. History is the continual revealing of his story. And so everything we talk about today as Christ being that sort of typology, or the typology of the serpent being Christ on the cross, this is also true for our lives. We have to recognize the reality of Christ on that cross and face it so that we can then be healed, so that we can then face all the poisonous serpents as we are now in the desert, metaphorically speaking. So this is a reality. This is true then, it's true now, it will always be true. And this is why the Bible is something that we all need to be reading and getting our hands on here. So Jesus Christ is, like I said, the limit reality / story. To face his reality is to face the source of all healing. And that's, again, for a lot of people, and even look at the thumbnail for today's image. Look at the thumbnail. When Moses lifted up the serpent, so many people were afraid of that reality. They turned away. But they're turning away from the source that heals them. And so many people today in our own culture, are they not doing the exact same thing? They're turning away from that thing which will ultimately heal them. And in so doing, they take on and they come closer to those things which will ultimately kill them. So history itself is a sort of wound. We fell from grace. We fell from the commandments of God. God then entered into historical time. But again, if we're Orthodox, he was always going to do that for the process of theosis, whether we fell or not. So the incarnation is not the absolute consequence of our fall. God was always going to enter into his own creation according to the Orthodox theology. So we don't limit our atonement to penal substitution. But we can look at history itself as a sort of wound. And we can see Christ for having to die on the cross due to the fall as a sort of reconciliation, a healing of that historical fall, and that ultimately as history ends in the second coming, as history ends in our own judgment, that is the end of history. That is the end of the entire story. How do we match up to these archetypal patterns of reality that are rooted back in the Logos himself? This is our own judgment. That which created the world, that which created history, that which entered history, that which is the source of archetypes, is that which is going to judge you and me. And so we have to face what we are afraid of to be freed of it. And that's why God, throughout the Old Testament and the New Testament, throughout Scripture, is emphatic to not have fear. To not have fear. The only thing we are to fear is God. Wisdom begins with the fear of the Lord. And why is that? Because if we only fear our own judgment, nothing can kill us, because God is that which gives us eternal life. We have to only fear God. And in that fear, we cannot fear things in the world, although we will still experience fear. But we're called then to a sort of bravery. We have to face the serpent. That's what we all have to do in every aspect of our lives. We have to face the serpent. And the serpents are all around us in different ways. Many of them are poisonous. Almost, they're all poisonous to a degree. They're all going to kill us one way or another. So bravery is facing that which instills fear and still going forth. And that's what, again, God is trying to tell us to do. That's what God was telling Jacob. So Joshua, I believe, actually. But we have to have bravery. We have to follow in that sort of archetypal pattern of Christ in which he faced all the serpents you could describe, all the things that we could be afraid of in this world. Christ already defeated. He already faced it. He already looked those serpents in the face, and he was that serpent held up on the stick. Bravery itself then is a form of healing. As we don't fear the things in this world, as we become braver and braver and braver, slowly, in a way, we're becoming more like Christ, and in so doing, we're actually healing ourselves through his grace. So we're not healing ourselves per se, but as we choose through our own free will, as we choose through our own volition to be more like Christ and follow those patterns, through God's grace, we will be healed, just as the Israelites were healed when they looked at the serpent on the stick. It's the archetypal pattern of Christ. It's the historical reality. And so how many serpents are we not facing in our own lives? Some of the serpents, yes, they're very obvious right now. Maybe it's the media, it's the propaganda, it's the medical establishment, whatever it be. It's the government, the governments around the world. It's maybe various orchestrations and efforts to organize a new reconfiguration of the world. Those are obvious serpents, but how many small serpents? How many serpents are in your daily life? How many serpents are you not facing in your own life right now? How many of those things that you know you should be doing that you're not doing? That is all the same process. Those poisonous serpents are also going to kill you. And the only way to stop is to face it. You have to look at it. You have to draw your attention towards it. And once you look at the things that you yourself are doing that could be detrimental to your own salvation and your own relationship with God, as you face those, then you can self-correct. Then you can get back in line with God. Then you can be healed. And so we are the lost Israelites in the desert. And our culture will not face the truth and the reality. The truth is that truth is a who, not a what. It is the incarnated God. Again, Christ said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. It's through Christ. He is the truth, capital T. The way to salvation is through him. If you want eternal life, it's through him. And that's what healing is. What does healing do? It heals you so that you live. That is the process of healing. And we can look at our own culture right now. The refusal to look at reality. I mean, just look at gender. Just look at now the normalization by institutions to want to have your children castrate themselves by the age of 3. By the time they're in kindergarten, they're being educated on what anal sex is. Is this looking at the reality of the world and addressing it? I would say no. I mean, just look, the misunderstanding of gender itself is a refusal to look at reality. And so we live in a culture that will not recognize the truth and the reality of Christ. Therefore, it won't recognize the truth and reality of objectivity itself. And because of that, we then are allowing this darkness of the refusal to look at the light is spreading through our society more and more and more and more. And therefore, it's allowing us to be killed by the poisonous serpents that are all around us. We are those Israelites. We have turned our back on God as a culture, as a society, as a civilization. And if we want to be saved, we have to turn back to him. We have to face the serpents. We have to face the reality of this world. And the reality of this world is most fully embodied in looking at what it did to God as he incarnated as a human being. That is the fullest reality of the serpentine nature of this world. And so bravery then is uniquely human. Because if God didn't take on that fully human nature, could he have been brave? If there is no sense or emotional sensation of fear or potential of that, can you actually be brave? I would say no. Bravery is a sort of rational process of seeing something, recognizing the fear, recognizing the unlikelihood, and yet facing it anyways. And so in a way, yeah, animals can have bravery, but I don't think they rationally have to process it like a human does. To be brave, we have to have a physical response, most likely of fear, and yet we override that. And so I argue that bravery, in a sense, is a uniquely human characteristic, and it's fully embodied by God incarnating as a full human man in Jesus of Nazareth, Jesus Christ. So guys, smash that like. This is tonight's stream. I hope for it to be very insightful and fun. Again, smash that like. If anybody would like to contribute, if you would like to support Church of the Eternal Logos, please super chat tonight using the Streamlabs link. I would greatly appreciate that. Also, if anybody, if you like what we're doing here on Church of the Eternal Logos and you would like to help in one way or another, please consider becoming a website member. And you become a website member with the following link here over at the website. It is davidpatrickcarey.com/register. You can become a website member for $5 a month and have access to a library of exclusive video content, of which includes one of my most recent videos is the mathematical challenges to Darwin's theory of evolution. It's actually my most popular video over on the Rockfin. So guys, if you're on Rockfin, make sure you check me out. If any of the mods there could share my link on Rockfin. So if you're watching, make sure you go follow me over on Rockfin. That's where a lot of my content, all my streams, if YouTube ever is to unfortunately take me down, God willing, that doesn't happen. But if anything were to happen to this YouTube channel, all those videos are going to be over at Rockfin, and I will continue to stream over there on Rockfin. So shout out to everybody over on Rockfin. We may have some people watching right now. Yes, so we got Tyler Hensley over there on Rockfin. He says, God bless you, David. Thank you for sharing the gift of wisdom. Well, thank you, Tyler Hensley, and shout out to everybody over on the Rock. So if any of the mods can please share that link, I would greatly appreciate it. Also, if anybody would like to sign up for a one-on-one session for this Thursday or next week, if you'd like to talk about theology, philosophy, mysticism, world religions, history of magic, goal setting, fitness, anything like that, you can do so by purchasing a one-on-one session using the following link here, and I would greatly appreciate that. It's the best way to sort of have my undivided attention to talk about anything you'd like. And of course, it's going to help perpetuate and support Church of the Eternal Logos and what I'm trying to do. Also, I've had multiple requests, and I am going to follow through. People have been asking me, hey, do you have a book list over on your website? Do you have a book list? Do you have a list of books for different topics? No, I don't, but I'm going to do it. So due to all the requests from various supporters, again, shout out to everybody who's asked, I will be putting together in the next few days a book list over on the website for different topics. Because my book list is going to look a little bit different than some of our other Orthodox brothers. I have a lot of stuff on Western esotericism. I have a lot of stuff on Gnosticism. I have a lot of stuff on science. I have a lot of stuff on comparative world religions. So you're going to see a lot of book lists regarding those topics. It will be up over at the website. Expect that in the next few days. And then I have a request for everybody. So last announcement here is I have been scouring the internet for a particular book, and I have been unable to find it. I can go to the publisher and I can buy an ebook version. I personally I love to have the physical copy of books, and there is a book that I cannot find anywhere, and I just want to share it. I want to give it to you guys. So if anybody out there can find a physical copy for purchase, please let me know. And that is this book right here by a scholar from Jewish magic to Gnosticism. From Jewish magic to Gnosticism. This is from a professor, I believe, at the University of Rome. And he is an expert, basically an expert on Mithraism and some of the ancient mystery cults. And he has a great book that I have. And I just want this book so freaking bad. And I cannot find a physical copy. Now, if I have to, I will ultimately just buy the PDF version. But if anybody out there in the English-speaking world, 'cause it comes in German and it also comes in English, if you can find an English copy, please, please, please let me know, and I would love to purchase it. Again, I'm going to share this over there on the Rockfin. If you guys can find this book anywhere, please let me know. I cannot find a physical copy. All the universities around me where I live, they have a physical copy. Now, again, I can buy the online PDF, but I would love to have an actual physical book of this. It's essential for my research. But maybe I'm going to have to get an ebook. Maybe I'll have to buy it from buy the PDF and then have somebody publish it as like my own sort of physical version. But anyways, I just want to throw that out there. So, all right. So with that being said, guys, let's get into today's stream. Again, please smash that like if you're over on the Rockfin or you're here on YouTube or you're on any of the, I think, 7 different places we're streaming today. So to begin, let's actually read some of the biblical stories of what we're talking about today. So I want to, if you have your Bible, you can follow along with me. Again, this is the Orthodox Study Bible for those. So if you have an Orthodox Study Bible, if you have any Bible, you can follow along. We're going to be looking at chapter 21 in the book of Numbers. And this is something that Jordan Peterson gets wrong as we'll watch this video. Once I get through some of the scripture, then we'll watch his sort of exegesis with Joe Rogan on these 2 narratives. But he says it's from the book of Exodus. Again, easy mistake. It's actually from Numbers 21. So we're going to read the beginning of chapter 21 through verse 9, okay? So this is the defeating of the Canaanites, right? So again, the Canaanites, here I can show you guys real quick what I'm talking about. Let's see here. So this right here, bam. This article right here is actually from a series of Jewish scholars showing archaeological evidence of all the bronze serpent worship in ancient Canaan and Israel. So this is a really interesting article. Again, this is from Jewish secular scholars, so definitely not from any Christians. I'll share that link with you guys in the live chat. But it's an interesting read. Certainly gives, again, a literality, a historicity to what we're reading here in the book of Numbers that some people probably would have questioned. But anyways, okay. So chapter 21, the book of Numbers, defeating the Canaanites, a few verses, and then we'll get into the copper serpent or the bronze serpent as it's often referred to. Now the Canaanite king Arad, who was dwelling in the desert, heard the news, for Israel came by way of Ethereum. Therefore he made war against Israel, and they carried off captives from them as booty. Then Israel made a vow to the Lord and said, if you will indeed deliver this people into my hand, I will anathematize him and his cities. So the Lord listened to the voice of Israel and delivered up the Canaanites, and they anathematized him and his cities. Therefore they called the name of that place Anathema. Okay, so that's interesting because, again, if you look at this article, there's historical archaeological evidence that the Canaanites did, in fact, worship serpents. Some evidence shows bronze serpents, and it's tied to fertility cults and goddess worship in ancient Canaan. Okay, next section, the copper serpent. Then they departed from Mount Hor by the way of the Red Sea, and they went around the land of Edom, and the people became discouraged on the way. So the people spoke against God and against Moses. Why did you bring us out of Egypt to kill us in the desert? For there's no bread nor water, and our soul is weary of this worthless bread. So the Lord sent venomous serpents among the people, and they bit the people. And many of the children of Israel died. Then the people came to Moses and were saying, we sinned and we spoke against the Lord and against you. Therefore pray to the Lord and let him take away the serpent from us. So Moses prayed for the people. Then the Lord said to Moses, make a serpent for yourself and put it on a signal pole. And it shall be, if a serpent should bite someone, okay, so all of us have been bitten by the serpent. All of us are sinners. That if a serpent should bite someone, when the one bitten looks at it, he shall live. So Moses made a copper serpent and put it on a signal pole. And it happened when a serpent bit anyone, and he looked at the copper serpent, he lived. Okay, this is a typology. If you have your Orthodox Study Bible, you'll see the next page is actually describing what a typology is. So I will just read the first paragraph on the typology. What is a typology? Typology is the interpretation of certain historical events occurring in the Old Testament as, quote, types that prefigure events to be fulfilled through the incarnation of the Son of God, the Logos, the Word, and his life and ministry as confirmed in the New Testament. In each case, the type, the first event, is linked to its corresponding future event called the antitype. This is a relationship that begins with a promise and ends with the fulfillment in Christ. St. John Chrysostom explains, quote, the types, like patterns, anticipated and sketched out beforehand the dispensations, the order of things, which would be accomplished under the new covenant, the New Testament. Types are in action, what prophecy is in words. Through them both, truths about Christ, his mother, the church, the sacraments, and the kingdom of heaven are revealed. Okay, so that is what a typology is. What are we seeing here? Now, I do want to make a quick reference to Hezekiah and the fact that in 4th Kingdoms, if you have an Orthodox Bible, or 2nd Kings, if you have another Bible, we can see Hezekiah in verse 18:4, that he removed the high places and broke into pieces the sacred pillars. He cut down the sacred wooden image and broke in pieces the bronze serpent that Moses had made, because up to those days the sons of Israel had burned incense to it. They called it Nuheshtan. And so we see then that the Israelites were worshiping the bronze serpent. They're worshiping the typology. They're worshiping the created image. So now let's flip forward to John 3. John chapter 3, the Gospel of John chapter 3. And we're going to read the entirety of verses 10 all the way through 21. So we're going to read 11 verses. Bear with me here. The Gospel of John chapter 3, verses 10 through 21. And we're going to see Christ make a direct reference to him being the serpent. Then I'm going to go back and read the footnotes, and then we'll listen to Jordan Peterson and his psychological interpretation. So the Gospel of John chapter 3, verse 10. Jesus answered and said to him, "Are you the teacher of Israel, and do not know these things? Most assuredly, I say to you, we speak what we know and testify what we have seen, and you do not receive our witness. If I have told you earthly things and you do not believe, how will you believe if I tell you about heavenly things? No one has ascended to heaven but he who came down from heaven, that is the Son of Man who is in heaven. And as Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, even so must the Son of Man be lifted up, that whoever believes in him should not perish, but have eternal life." Healing, a typology. We saw the Israelites bit by the poisonous snakes, healed by their looking at Christ. "For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. For God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but that the world through him might be saved," might be healed. "He who believes in him is not condemned, but he who does not believe is condemned already, because he has not believed in the name of the only begotten Son of God. And this is the condemnation, that the light has come into the world, and men love darkness rather than light, because their deeds were evil." That's the world we live in right now. "For everyone practicing evil hates the light, and does not come to the light, lest his deeds should be exposed. But he who does the truth comes to the light, that his deeds may be clearly seen, that they have been done in God." Okay, now, rewind back to Numbers 21. We're going to read the footnote, the Orthodox footnote to that whole description of Moses holding up the serpent. What does it mean? The people who looked at the copper serpent on the signal pole lived. They lived because the motionless copper serpent signaled that the power of the venom in them was now dead. The fall. Right, the venom that's in all of us. The serpent bit Adam in the Garden of Eden, and his venom eventually caused him to die physically and decay in the grave. Quote, so all the days Adam lived were 930 years, and he died, period. Death also came into the world through him. When Christ hung motionless on the cross, his dead body signaled the end of death's reign over man's body. Quote, he trampled down death by his death upon those in the tombs bestowing life, unquote. The copper serpent, quote, saved those who looked upon it, not because it lived, but because it was killed, and killed with it the powers that were subject to it, being destroyed as it deserved. And what is the fitting epithet from us? O death, where is your sting? O grave, where is your victory? You were overthrown by the cross. You are slain by him who is the giver of life, who are without breath, dead, without motion, even though you keep from the serpent lifted up on the high pole. Gregory the theologian. Okay, flip now back to John chapter 3. We're going to read that footnote. And it says, verse 14, Moses lifted up an image of a serpent to cure the Israelites from deadly bites of poisonous snakes. Numbers chapter 21, verse 4 through 9. This miracle-working image prefigured Christ being lifted up on the cross. As believers behold the crucified Christ in faith, the power of sin and death is overthrown in them. This is the image of a serpent, was the weapon that destroyed the power of the serpents. So the instrument of Christ's death becomes the weapon that overthrows death itself. Okay, now let's listen to Jordan Peterson's interpretation. Now again, admittedly, it is very secular. It's filled with psychological interpretations, but I do think, again, give credit where credit is due, that Jordan is actually hitting on a very interesting and important archetypal reality and truth here with his understanding. So I'll probably stop just so it doesn't get flagged by the algorithms. The algorithm demons, if we will. But here we go. This is Jordan Peterson talking about what we just read.
This is weird. This is one of those impossibly weird stories. You think this is either insane or it's true, because that's the only options. It's not boring. It's not predictable. It's either insane or it's true. And I got way deeper into that too. I realized some things about the Exodus story. There's a scene in there in the Exodus story where God sends
technically Numbers.
Poisonous. This is so cool. It's so stunning. I'll tell you a little bit about it if you don't mind. It's so cool, Joe. I can't believe it can possibly be true. So Moses leads his people out of the tyranny, right? But weirdly enough, they don't go to the promised land. This is very weird. They go into the desert. Well, why? Well, we're all, say, prisoners of our own tyrannical misconceptions and misperceptions, psychologically and socially. So let's say we free ourselves from those. Well, then we're nowhere. At least we were guided by that. That's why people have nostalgia for tyranny. It's like, at least we had enough to eat then. At least we knew who we were then. It's like out of the...
And I think if anybody who knows anybody from the Soviet... I know a few people, former Soviet Union boomers. And in fact, I've heard this before, the sort of nostalgia for the Soviet Union. Unfortunately, and as an American, hurtful. But they talked about the homelessness. Again, these people lived in California, so you can imagine not exactly the best representation of American values, but nonetheless, we have a lot of problems. The incredible homelessness there in California, and you go to an interstate turnoff, and you're going to see a freaking homelessness embankment camp. And so they talked about, they had nostalgia for the Soviet Union. I think it's interesting that a lot of people underneath that sort of tyrannical social pressure do have a sort of consolidated social identity that then gets challenged or dissolved when the sort of restraint of that tyrannical force dissipates.
The tyrant's grasp into the desert. And so you think, why don't people want to challenge their own preconceptions? It's like, yeah, it's out of the tyranny into the desert. And the worse the tyranny, the worse the desert. So if you've been tormenting yourself with tyrannical preconceptions and totalitarian obligations and you decide to drop it, or maybe you're shocked out of that by trauma, you don't go to paradise. You go to the desert. And maybe that's even worse. So no wonder people don't do it. So now the Israelites are out in the desert. You think, why are they there for 40 years? And maybe it's because it takes 3 generations to recover from tyranny. You're in the desert.
Now, okay, certainly there could be more extrapolation and unpacking more meanings. I will give Peterson that in regards to the 40 years. But also we see this as another typology, right? We see the 40 days, the 40 years. We see the number 40 used consecutively in the Bible. Most identifiable is Christ going to the deserts, the wilderness for 40 days and 40 nights. We see it as a sort of fasting period, a sort of cleansing period. And so the Israelites being in the desert for 40 years, we see another sort of cleansing period, a purifying period before they're brought into the promised land, before Christ fulfills his mission, his incarnating salvific mission, which is, again, the promised land, defeating death by death, allowing us to enter into that promised land. Again, we see the typology being consistent. We see the archetypes, the symbols being consistent in that way.
Desert, man. And so the Israelites start worshiping idols. It's ideology. It's the same thing. And that's why, because they don't have anything to orient themselves, because they're not tyrannized anymore, and they get all fractious and they fight with themselves. And Moses has to spend like all day judging their conflicts, because otherwise they're at each other's throats. And anyways, they turn to false idols. And so God isn't very happy about this, and he sends poisonous snakes in there to bite them. So it's like out of the tyranny into the desert. Now we're fractured by ideologies. Now the poisonous snakes come, and so the poisonous snakes are biting them and biting them and biting them, and they finally break down and go to Moses and say, look, you want to have a chat with God and get him to call off the damn snakes? And Moses says, yeah, okay. And so he goes and talks to God, and God says, this is weird. This is one of those impossibly weird stories. You think this is either insane or it's true, because that's the only options. It's not boring. It's not predictable. It's either insane or it's true, okay? And maybe we could start by thinking it's insane, but whatever. Moses talks to God, and God could just call off the snakes, right? That's what you'd expect him to do, but that isn't what happens. He says, go make an image of a snake in bronze and make an image of a stick, like a staff, and put the snake on the staff and then stick it in the ground. And then have the Israelites go and look at the snake, and then the snakes won't bite them anymore. You think, what the hell is... Okay, here's a doctrine from all fields of psychotherapy.
Okay.
Look at what you're terrified of, and you will get bravery.
Unless what you're terrified of is a pack of wolves, and they're going to fucking eat you.
Yeah, well, look, it's not like there aren't real dangers, but look, if you're threatened by a pack of wolves and you go out and study them...
You'll realize you're fucked. Unless you have guns.
Okay, so the classic...
Wow, the incredible wisdom of Joe Rogan talking... Yikes. Anyways, continuing on here, I love this interpretation. Again, giving credit where credit due, I hadn't heard until I saw this clip from Jordan Peterson show. Again, credit where credit is due. I had not heard this interpretation, again, of the fuller extrapolation of, again, looking at the serpent and this healing process. So he's the one that really gave me sort of connected the dots for today's stream.
Therapeutic treatment for terror, and the poisoning that terror induces is exposure, voluntary exposure.
Yeah.
Okay, so the pattern there is face what you're most afraid of, and you will be free.
Okay.
Okay.
That makes sense.
Voluntarily.
Yeah.
Now that's a doctrine of psychotherapy now.
Right.
Okay. So now that's weird. That's weird. So God doesn't chase away the snakes. He makes everyone braver. Okay, because that's better than being safe. Bravery is better than safety. It's a more reliable cure for terror. Okay, now, that's cool. But this is even more cool. In the Gospels, Christ says that he has to be lifted up like the serpent in the desert. You think, what the hell does that possibly mean? Because, well, that's a snake first on a stick, and Christ is comparing himself to a snake on a stick? Okay, so what is this? What can this possibly mean? Well, I was thinking about that in relationship to imagery of the crucifix and the story that surrounds it. So Jung thought that the Passion story was archetypal because it's a limit story, like this, this debate at Oxford. You cannot write a more tragic story. It's impossible, technically. Why? Well, because it's a story of the aggregation of everything that people are afraid of. So there was no death more painful than crucifixion. That's why the Romans invented it. It was to punish political miscreants. It was the slow, agonizing death by suffocation, essentially, and dehydration and exposure. It's extraordinarily painful.
Which, again, I love as an archetype, because we see that a device that was used to torture people, God incarnate then takes on as a salvific symbol, a symbol that, again, all of us then wear around our neck as the defeating of death, the cross itself. Again, how archetypal, right? And again, we're not trying to limit to this, because this is a historical, literal reality as well. But isn't it so profound to even see how that which the most dominant, most powerful governmental force on the planet at the time, the Roman Empire that stretched from Western Europe all the way to India, that the symbol of torture that it used was also the symbol that God used to show his defeating of the world itself. Incredible.
Okay, so that sucks. That's pain, man. Plus, you know it's coming. That's part of the story. Plus, your best friend betrayed you into it. Plus, your people turned against you. Plus, they're led by a tyrant who doubts truth. Plus, you're a victim of the Roman Empire. Plus, you're completely innocent. Plus, everybody knows it. Plus, they choose a criminal to be released from this experience instead of you, even though they know he's a criminal and they know you're innocent. So, and you're young and you've done no wrong and all you've done is help people. So it's a limit story. Okay, so then you think, we've been looking at that limit story for 2,000 years in the image and in the story. What are we doing? Well, you're supposed to visit the stations of the cross, let's say. Okay, here's the idea. You hear the crucifixion story and you play with it. Who are you? Maybe if you're female, you're Mary. And why is that? It's the Pieta. Because you have to offer your children to the destruction of the world. That's female courage. That's the mother that doesn't hold her child back. It's like, go out. To what? Eventually your death and destruction. Go out. Leave me. Be in the world. That's
okay, and I want to comment on this because I've talked about this sort of female archetype. Again, when you look at these serpent cults, whether it be the Ophites or the Sethians or some of the Naga stuff, or even if you go back into the Canaanite, so you could go right here over to the Canaanite religions where they worship these serpents. What do you see? The bronze serpent being a symbol of fertility, and they're worshiping these goddesses, these goddess figures. And often in these goddess figures, there's an acceptance of sort of sexual promiscuity. I've talked about how I have so many books over here on magic, ancient magic, medieval, Renaissance magic, and that I have an icon over here of Saint Justina and Saint Cyprian and how he converted from being the great magician into a great bishop, a great converter of the pagans through her piety and her righteousness and her purity, a perpetual virgin. Then we look at the Theotokos and we see this archetype of femininity regarding purity, virginity, but also motherhood in the Theotokos. She is the mother. She's the mother of the church. She's the mother of Christ. She gives God his physical body. That archetype of the female is so powerful that, again, if we are theoretically saying we're in a culture filled with these poisonous serpents, these ancient serpentine cultures worship goddess figures that were often explicitly sexual. And then we can look at the sort of Lilith, the sort of sexual works of women in our society today, right? That really we're moving back, as I've said before, I've tried to talk about this in multiple different streams, but the sort of archaic revival or the global village, our regression, the progressive regression back towards ancient paganism. That's where we're going. And we can see this with the way that we view female empowerment. Because a woman and her purity and her virginity, there's a value there that you can't put a dollar amount on. Unlike a man has to sort of earn his worth in society, women are given a sort of worth from birth as they preserve their sort of sexuality and their purity, at least from most Orthodox, almost all Orthodox traditional understandings. Look at across the world religions that an Orthodox understanding, I'm not just talking about Orthodoxy and Christianity, but look at Islam, look at Judaism, Abrahamic, look at other traditions, that female purity has a higher privilege. But when you look at some of these ancient serpentine cults, female promiscuity in these goddess cultures that participate in full moon orgies, orgiastic activity, sexual rituals, all this different stuff, it's venerating the exact opposite, because in a way there is also a real power of women who use their sexuality. And this is what the simplification of men, right? Men become simps because they can't resist when they see the sexual temptation of women, the OnlyFans, our culture, our social media, all this different stuff, that women in their sexuality and displaying their sexuality openly and talking about it and becoming more quote unquote empowered sexually, it is a real sort of force. But in a way, that force always inverts our society. It inverts this ordered structure. It inverts these traditional organization of how things should work to be their most effective, to be that and aligned with God. And so I think it's interesting to see how our image of the mother, in fact, mothers, what's the propaganda right now? Don't have children, right? If you're a Western woman and you have children, well, you're hurting the environment, and you see the environment, okay, association back to the mother goddess, back to Gaia, back to these feminine goddess cults, which then interpret sexuality differently. So don't be a mother, because that'll be bad for the society, for the globe, which again is the globe and global climate change in a sense is a new pretense, a new pretext for going back to these nature worshiping, goddess worshiping religious traditions. I think there's something there. Maybe you guys disagree, but let me know.
That's feminine courage, man, to let her baby go. You're a pilot. You doubt truth, but you'll go along with the crowd. You're Judas because you betray your best friend. You're the mob. You're the criminal. All of that, that's you. You look on all those things that you hate and are terrified by. That's not a snake. It's like the worst of all possible snakes everywhere. That's what you're looking at. What do you see? You see death, you see destruction, pain, terror, tyranny, frailty, betrayal. Look harder, look harder, look harder. What do you see? The death and resurrection. You look far enough into the abyss, you see the light. Well, that's the story. That's the connection between those stories. And this unbelievably strange thing is that connection exists. It's like there's the strange story of the serpent in the desert, and we know that story is 3,000 years old, something like that. We know that. And then we know perfectly well that Christ said that he was allied, that his image was allied with that snake. That's written down. And even if you don't believe in the historical reality of Christ, someone still made that connection. And did they know everything we were talking about today explicitly? So what do we make of the fact that the shamanic experience, which is replicable cross-culturally and which dominated the human landscape for at least 20,000 years, we know that it involves a death and a resurrection, and an entry into paradise and a reunion with the ancestors. And so what does it mean? Who knows, man? This is way past my knowledge, but I know that connection that I just told you about between the story in the New Testament and that story in Exodus. That took me like 30 years to figure out, because there's also the idea that the hero goes into the abyss to rescue his father from the belly of the beast. But that's the same idea, right? You go down, and I thought, I knew this the last time I went and lectured to, is like, you look into the abyss long enough and you see the spirit of the benevolent father manifesting itself. That's the case. That is the case. If you look into the depths of evil and suffering, what you see is not the finality of evil and suffering. You see the victory of the spirit that obtains victory over that. And then you might think biologically, well, how could it be any different, Joe? That's the spirit of life. Life is mortal suffering. It's like, but we live. What's the spirit of victorious life if it's not the benevolent father who overcomes the catastrophe of suffering? Like, what else could it possibly, even if you think about this just as an instinct, it's like you're threatened by what's worse than death, and there are plenty of things worse than death that you can be threatened by. And yet you have a revelation that enables your transcendence of that. Well, what could it be other than the spirit that overcomes death in some fundamental sense? This is
And so I love that, right? I mean, again, he talks about, it's very secular, very psychological, but, for Jordan Peterson, that was I thought that was one of the better clips I've heard him talk about Scripture, and there's so much profundity there. When he talks about, again, the sort of Pinocchio narrative of going down and rescuing your father from the belly of the whale, well, Christ and the incarnation of the Logos, in a way, now again, as Orthodox, he was always going to incarnate through theosis, which again is a way of fusing that which is created with that which is the creator, right? This is the process, and it's through these uncreated energies. These energies, so he's talking about life. He's talking about truth. He's talking about love. He's talking about all these different things in this description of Numbers and John, and Christ being being the fulfillment of the typology of the serpent raised up on the pole. What that is, again, that spirit, the more you look into the catastrophes of the world, the pain of the world, you do see the full realization of the cross. You do see the full realization of God's saving grace. And this is where people want to talk, well, if God exists, how come there's evil? This is the problem of theodicy. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that term in regards to religious studies. Theodicy. Theodicy is how do you attempt to explain the existence of evil in the face of a quote-unquote omniscient, benevolent God. Well, we understand this as Orthodox, is that it's always tied to your free will. And that goes all the way back to Lucifer and the fall, because Lucifer as an angel, the most beautiful angel, intelligent angel, made, before creation itself, it through his free will wanted to be God. It wanted to be worshipped, and he was by a third of the angelic hierarchy. This is this ripping away, this fall of Lucifer as Satan, the king, the ultimate serpent of this world, right? Evil exists through our own free will. It's not that God creates bad things, or why does God allow, bad XYZ thing to happen? That's not how it works. It's that God allows the consequences of our own decision, and that's what the fall is itself. The fall is a consequence of the decisions through free will, which is part and parcel of being made in the image of God, because only God has free will. We don't worship the Muslim God. Our God doesn't have to create. Our God creates because he free will chooses to create the world. And he, through his free will, chose to create creatures like you and me that can participate in his glory, in his energies. And it's through that participation in the uncreated energies of God that this world, this created world, is fused back with divinity. And because our free will chose to go away from God, evil, death, all these things entered into the world. The same death that the Israelites were trying to avoid from those poisonous snakes. And so death enters the world. Christ then has to be crucified. His death has to conquer death. And by doing so, the world is saved. Through the grossest tragedy, from the archetype of facing the most serpents, right? Facing these serpents, the betrayal, the denial of his own community, being rejected by the Jews, being laughed at, being mocked, having his mother watch his own torture in public, right? The worst things over. There's just archetypal stories of the things that we fear of. The worst thing that could happen. It's just over and over and over again for Christ. But in all that tragedy, ironically, it's the most glorious thing that could have happened in the world. Wow. That is profound. That is really insightful. And that gives us a lot of hope, and that should instill in us bravery for the things that we have to deal with again in the 21st century. The Great Reset, the powers that be wanting to reorganize, take away private property. Right now, a big one that is just startling to see how normalized grooming of children, wanting to educate children about sex as old as kindergarten, and that people that don't say no or don't say gay bill. Can you believe that people are this active to try to promote the sexualization of kindergartners? This would have been unheard of 5 years ago. What is the difference between 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago? I speculate here, and you guys can disagree, but maybe it has to do with the scale of sinful activity, like the OnlyFans, the internet, the degeneracy, the normalization of degeneracy, the normalization of these poisonous serpents that are biting us and killing us has grown. I mean, how is it that just within 5 to 10 years, people, politicians, celebrities, your average person is in favor of the sexualization of kindergartners learning about masturbation, learning about anal sex, learning about sexual identity, and, quote, choosing their gender. They're not even allowed to choose what they eat. But we have politicians and authority figures telling us that they should be able to choose their gender and that the state should be able to then perform medical operations on them against the will of the parents. How does this happen? How does this happen? So, lots of wild stuff. Again, I just want to maybe we can play this clip over again. And I'm sorry I cut it up. I jumped in a lot real quick on this, so I'll just let it play again. Jordan Peterson's take on this whole thing. Again, unfortunately, Jordan Peterson hasn't got to the point where he will proclaim the literality, the historicity of Christ. He uses these archetypes, but again, give credit where credit is due. When he discussed this story, he did it in a way that I thought was very profound. It's just that he misses the spiritual foundation of what all this means. And because of that, you know, like somebody said, he makes Moses and Christ turn out to be psychotherapists. That's not the point. This isn't psychotherapy. This is real spiritual healing. And so, you know, God willing, and that Peterson will come around, and eventually he will be able to see, he'll be able to face that reality as he's talking about. So I'll play it again real quick without cutting it off, and then I have one more article I want to hit with you guys, and then we'll get to the super chat. So guys, if you support this stream, if you like what we're doing, make sure to send in a super chat using the Streamlabs link, and I'll get to them in just a minute.
This is weird. This is one of those impossibly weird stories. You think this is either insane or it's true, because that's the only options. It's not boring. It's not predictable. It's either insane or it's true, okay? And maybe we could start by thinking it's insane, but whatever. Moses talks to God, and God could just call off the snakes, right? That's what you'd expect him to do, but that isn't what happens. He says, go make an image of a snake in bronze and make an image of a stick, like a staff, and put the snake on the staff, and then stick it in the ground. And then have the Israelites go and look at the snake, and then the snakes won't bite them anymore. And you think, what the hell is... Okay, here's a doctrine from all fields of psychotherapy.
Okay.
Look at what you're terrified of, and you will get bravery.
Unless what you're terrified of is a pack of wolves, and they're going to fucking eat you.
Yeah, well, okay.
That makes sense.
Voluntarily.
Yeah.
Now, that's a doctrine of psychotherapy now.
Right.
Okay, so now, that's weird. That's weird. So God doesn't chase away the snakes. He says that he has to be lifted up like the serpent in the desert. You think, what the hell does that possibly mean? Because, well, that's a snake first on a stick, and Christ is comparing himself to a snake on a stick? Okay, so what is this? What can this possibly mean? Well, I was thinking about that in relationship to imagery of the crucifix and the story that surrounds it. So Jung thought that the Passion story was archetypal because it's a limit story, like this debate at Oxford. You cannot write a more tragic story. It's impossible, technically. Why? Well, because it's a story of the aggregation of everything that people are afraid of. So there was no death more painful than crucifixion. That's why the Romans invented it. It was to punish political miscreants. It was the slow, agonizing death by suffocation, essentially, and dehydration and exposure. It's extraordinarily painful. Okay, so that sucks. That's pain, man. Plus, you know it's coming. That's part of the story. Plus, your best friend betrayed you into it. Plus, your people turned against you. Plus, they're led by a tyrant who doubts truth. Plus, you're a victim of the Roman Empire. Plus, you're completely innocent. Plus, everybody knows it. Plus, they They choose a criminal to be released from this experience instead of you, even though they know he's a criminal and they know you're innocent. So, and you're young and you've done no wrong and all you've done is help people. So it's a limit story. Okay, so then you think, we've been looking at that limit story for 2,000 years in the image and in the story. What are we doing? Well, you're supposed to visit the stations of the cross, let's say. Okay, here's the idea. You hear the crucifixion story and you play with it. Who are you? Maybe if you're female, you're Mary. And why is that? It's the Pieta. Because you have to offer your children to the destruction of the world. That's female courage. That's the mother that doesn't hold her child back. It's like, go out. To what? Eventually your death and destruction. Go out. Leave me. Be in the world. That's feminine courage, man, to let her baby go. You're Pilate. You doubt truth, but you'll go along with the crowd. You're Judas because you betray your best friend. You're the mob. You're the criminal. All of that, that's you. You look on all those things that you hate and are terrified by. That's not a snake. It's like the worst of all possible snakes everywhere. That's what you're looking at. What do you see? You see death, you see destruction, pain, terror, tyranny, frailty, betrayal. Look harder, look harder, look harder. What do you see? The death and resurrection. You look far enough into the abyss, you see the light. Well, that's the story. That's the connection between those stories. And this unbelievably strange thing is that connection exists. It's like there's the strange story of the serpent in the desert, and we know that story is 3,000 years old, something like that. We know that. And then we know perfectly well that Christ said that he was allied, that his image was allied with that snake. That's written down. And even if you don't believe in the historical reality of Christ, someone still made that connection. And did they know everything we were talking about today explicitly? So what do we make of the fact that the shamanic experience, which is replicable cross-culturally and which dominated the human landscape for at least 20,000 years, we know that it involves a death and a resurrection, and an entry into paradise and a reunion with the ancestors. And so what does it mean? Who knows, man? This is way past my knowledge, but I know that connection that I just told you about between the story in the New Testament and that story in Exodus. That took me like 30 years to figure out, because there's also the idea that the hero goes into the abyss to rescue his father from the belly of the beast. But that's the same idea, right? You go down, and I thought, I knew this the last time I went and lectured to, is like, you look into the abyss long enough and you see the spirit of the benevolent father manifesting itself. That's the case. That is the case. If you look into the depths of evil and suffering, what you see is not the finality of evil and suffering. You see the victory of the spirit that obtains victory over that. And then you might think biologically, well, how could it be any different, Joe? That's the spirit of life.
That is the spirit of Christ. That is the spirit of God. That is the Holy Spirit. And so I got one more thing I want to read to you guys, but before I get to that, I just want to read Mark chapter 16, verse 17 and 18, because this is a point. So this is Mark. Again, I was reading the Gospel of John earlier, chapter 3. This is chapter 16. This is called the Great Commission. And what does it say about the serpents, right? That he who believes, so this is 16, he who believes and is baptized will be saved, but he who does not believe will be condemned. And these signs will follow those who believe. In my name they will cast out demons. They will speak with new tongues. They will take up serpents, and if they drink anything deadly, they will by no means hurt them. They will lay hands on the sick, and they will recover. And then what is the footnote? To take up serpents refers primarily to spiritual battles with the demons. Thus, Christ is promising to deliver believers from the powers of sin. Again, the serpent on the signal pole, Christ on the cross. To believers from the powers of sin. Furthermore, this would include certain physical protection as well. St. Paul was bitten by a serpent and suffered no harm, Acts 28, 3-6. And according to tradition, Barsabbas, Justus, Acts 1:23, was forced by unbelievers to drink poison and survived. Never deliberately committing harmful acts against oneself, that is a grave sin. That is a grave sin. So that is Mark 16. Now what I want to do, thank you guys so much for the super chats. I'll be getting to those in just a moment. Bear with me here. But I want to read a little article here on some biblical bravery, and then we will get to the super chats here. And so this is on, I'll share this. This is what does the Bible say about bravery. Let me share this with you guys here in the live chat so you guys can read it if you'd like. But I just want to read these 1, 2, 3 in the last paragraph. It says, let me zoom in so you guys can see it better. Okay, zoom in here. There we go. God is with us. In Joshua 1 through 1, chapter 1, verse 1 through 9, God gives us the first reason to be brave. Again, he had chosen Joshua as Moses' successor, and the task was daunting. It would be Joshua, not Moses, who would lead the Israelites into the promised land and drive out its pagan inhabitants. 3 times in this passage, the Lord commands Joshua to be strong and courageous. God knew the challenges Joshua would face and the formidable appearance of the enemy. But because the Lord would go with the children of Israel, Joshua could move forward with confidence. He was not alone. The people would not have to fight an overwhelming battle on their own. God would fight for them. Exodus 14:14, Deuteronomy 1:30. Number 2 here. Past experiences. David as a young shepherd boy, 1 Samuel 17:12 through 15 is an example of bravery based on his experience with the Lord. He volunteered to face the giant Goliath because he had seen the Lord deliver him before. His answer to the incredulous King Saul was, quote, "The Lord who rescued me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will rescue me from the hand of this Philistine." David stood up bravely to the taunting giant, confident that because he stood in the strength of the Lord, he would be victorious. He answered Goliath's challenge with these brave words, "You come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you with the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hands. I will strike you down and cut off your head. This very day I will give the carcasses of the Philistine army to the birds and the wild animals, and the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel. All those gathered here will know that it is not by sword or spear that the Lord saves, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give all of you into our hands." David's bravery was not motivated by arrogance or self-promotion, but his conviction that God's honor was at stake. Someone had to do something about the giant's blasphemy. And then here's number 3. God's plan will never fail. Isaiah 46, 9 through 11 assures us that no matter what seems to be going on in our world, God is still in control. And that's even true right now, despite the chaos we see, despite the people who we may suspect of potentially planning or scheming or having a sort of conspiratorial agenda against us. We may face formidable circumstances, but God is not daunted. He is working behind the scenes to accomplish his good plans. We can be brave when we get the lab results, the layoff notice, or the subpoena if we desire God's purposes in our lives. We can know that he is working all things together for our good, and that knowledge makes us brave. Romans 2:28. Bravery is the outward bravado. Bravery is acting in the face of fear. It's being afraid to do something and doing it anyway. The world provides us with many opportunities to be afraid. Many of those fears are real threats to our lives and families. It is not wrong to be afraid. It is wrong to let fear make our decisions. How many people made decisions based on fear? Let's say within the last 2 years, and without getting into any specifics, made decisions that they regret. Made decisions that they potentially regret. I would say a lot of people right now feel like they made decisions that they regret to some degree. Oh, I didn't realize I needed to pull this down. There we go. That we it's not wrong to be afraid. It is wrong to let fear make our decisions. Do not make decisions out of fear. As we've seen, if our eyes have been open for the last 2 years, people who made quick decisions base out of fear, often make decisions that are planned against us by other people. People who may be scheming against us. Yes, David Atkinson, allegedly. People who may be allegedly scheming against us. So, covering all our bases. And that's where bravery comes in. We are brave when we remind ourselves of all God's promises and press on in the direction he leads. Philippians 3:14. Choosing to obey Christ in everything, regardless of the personal cost, is the ultimate act of bravery. Luke 9:23. And that concludes tonight's stream, guys, on facing the serpent, being brave, that we are healed when we face the things that we're afraid of. That could be pursuing goals. That could be people. That could be circumstances with the world. That could be a lot of different a lot of different scenarios. Could be death. Could be gossip. Could be the way other people perceive us. All these things, some of us fear. We must not be fearful. We must face these serpents so that we can then be healed by them by the grace of God, and that they are not poison serpents that can kill us. So thank you guys. Please smash that like. I hope everybody enjoyed tonight's stream, and I will be getting at the super chat. So if you guys appreciated tonight's stream, please smash that like. And if you would like, please throw in a super chat using the Streamlabs link, or YouTube if you prefer. So, first super chat comes to us from Kingdom Kid. Kingdom Kid throws in $5. Shout out to Kingdom Kid. He said, do you follow Dr. Justin Sledge, Esoterica? He believes Israelites were and remained entrenched in mysticisms. Does that take away from the supposed greatness of God in the biblical narrative? Thank you. No, actually, I think that, there's a lot of different mysticisms. The ancient Israelites, again, we have to understand that the ancient world was very different than the world we live in now, and that magic, sorcery, we know based on our own scriptures that Moloch worship, various forms of magic, various forms of goddess veneration, worship of Baal, that this was being performed by the Israelites. Look at Sodom and Gomorrah and how the city of Sodom was inverted. Again, having to deal with many things that we're probably experiencing now in our world. So that's why if you guys can, maybe this is another good time to ask you, if you guys can find this book. This is a book that I'm trying to find right now. It's actually on From Jewish Magic to Gnosticism. And this is a book by basically the leading scholar on ancient Mithraism. And if you guys could find this for me, if anybody in the English-speaking world, I cannot find a physical copy of this book anywhere. I'll even put it up as a text. If anybody can find this book, I would greatly, 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 greatly appreciate it. I cannot find it anywhere. And so it is... one second. If anybody could find this book right here, Attilio Mastrosinque, From Jewish Magic to Gnosticism. This is a book that I've been trying to find. I cannot find it anywhere, and it kind of goes with the question that's being asked right here by Kingdom Kid regarding the ancient Israelites. And so to answer, I've never watched Dr. Justin Sledge of Esoterica. I'll have to check that out. I've never watched Justin Sledge of Esoterica. But in regards to the ancient Israelites participating in a lot of various forms of mysticism, absolutely do I think they're participating in that. And even, again, forms of magic. And I think some of these magical groups within some of the Israelites affected and structured understandings of the New Testament by these Gnostic groups who were maybe perpetuating some of these esoteric practices. Now, in regards to Kabbalah, I am not one who believes that Kabbalah goes back to the Old Testament. The Zohar, the main text of Kabbalistic magic, is 13th century, created in the Iberian Peninsula in Spain. Now, if you're a Kabbalist, you believe that potentially goes back to rabbis around the life of Christ or the fall of the temple, 70 AD, and that they then codified and put into Kabbalistic practices. They wrote it down, or there was an oral tradition that was deliberately perpetuated until the Zohar got written. I'm very skeptical of that. I see Kabbalah as more of a mixture, syncretic tradition with a lot of different traditions from the ancient period. So that includes, Egyptian forms of magic, Chaldean forms of magic. So all the numerology and grammatology and all that stuff within Kabbalah. I don't see that as, it could be, maybe there are practices within the ancient Jews. I'm not familiar. But at least in regards to Kabbalah as we understand it, it is, I would argue, if I was arguing it with somebody, I would feel that it's a much more recent phenomenon in the history of the Jewish people. But I know that it's been debated by both sides and by Jews, that some Jews have debated both sides of that argument. So, but in regards, again, sorry, I'm taking forever on this topic, but Kingdom Kid, again, thank you so much for the support. Asked, do you follow Justin Sledge of Esoterica? No, I not, but I can look up. Somebody shoot me the link of Esoterica. Oh, somebody says, Iswa Moose says, Esoterica, good channel. Okay. Yeah, so Henley Dangerfield, that is the PDF. You can get the PDF from the publisher, which again, I think I'm probably going to have to purchase. I just wish I could find a physical copy. Like here is one of his other books, The Mysteries of Mithras, and this is the same publisher. I would love to get the Jewish Magic, From Jewish Magic to Gnosticism, another book like this. I just can't find it anywhere. I cannot find one anywhere, no matter the price, no matter where I look. So like Dangerfield Henley, I will probably end up buying the PDF. I prefer to have physical copies of my research texts. I hate having to use PDF versions, but I'll probably have to succumb to that. It's like 64 euros just for a PDF. But anyways, thank you, Henley. And again, if anybody can find this book by Attilio, From Jewish Magic to Gnosticism, an actual physical book, I would be greatly, greatly indebted. Cannot find one anywhere. But he says that he believes that the Israelites remained entrenched in mysticism. I think, yeah, to a degree, that's also true. Does that take away from the supposed greatness of God in the biblical narrative? No, I do not think, because I also believe that within those Israelites, there were true believing Jews that continued. So you can look at the prophets, you can look at various holy figures throughout the Old Testament, that there's a consistent understanding, there's a consistent morality, there's a consistent condemnation against the mystical and the magical and the pagan practices. And I think that then is fulfilled, that tradition is fulfilled in Jesus Christ, which takes on many of the sort of semiotics of it all. So anyways, thank you very much, Kingdom Kid. I appreciate that support and for your super chat. Pim Orosov throws in $20. Thank you so much, Pim. I appreciate it. He says, hey, David, great stream. I've been interested in Mithraism, but very hard to research. Not much source. I think it's a Hellenized version of Moloch cults after Alexander the Great sacked Persepolis. I would love if you share what I learn. Well, I'm not sure what you learned, Pim. I can share what I learned, but I have a few books on Mithraism. Mithraism is important for me because of its use of inebriating substances, which is tied to my sort of academic work. Mithraism obviously was rampant throughout the ancient world. It became very, very popular within the Roman military. This is why Rome has the Mithraic mysteries. I believe that Mithraism has been perpetuated into the contemporary day. I believe that there's probably a lot of elites that worship a sort of Mithraic form of ancient practice. Mithraism himself is a sort of androgynous god. For example, I believe that there's evidence I've seen argued that the Statue of Liberty is actually the female archetype or the female version of Mithra. Mithraism was like a solar deity. He was the god of like contracts and legal obligations, all this stuff. But he was also very prominent in Persia, where eventually he gets adopted into sort of Zoroastrianism. Mithra is mentioned within the Vedas of India. Mithra in the Mithraic cults, we know they use things like Haoma, Pagam, and Harmala. It's believed. I've heard. I don't have an evidence. If anybody has evidence for this, please let me know. I haven't heard of a scholastic source, but I've heard people talk about various Mithraic cults and Mithraic sacramental uses, mixing their wine with Amanita muscaria mushrooms. Now, because Mithra had a sort of sacramental rituals, but they used a lot of inebriating substances. So that's why I'm very much interested in Mithraism. I have this book, again, by the scholar I mentioned, The Mysteries of Mithras. This scholar is arguably considered one of the leading experts on Mithraism, and this is his work really encapsulating. And he argues, and this is why I love this book, he's one of the leading experts. He argues that and this is what this book is about, that it's a poor argument. You know, you hear people say that, oh, Christianity is just a variation of Mithraism. Well, he argues, being one of the leading scholastic experts, who can say somebody's the expert, but he argues that is not totally accurate. Yes, that there are some semiotic similarities, but to just equate ancient Mithraic practices with Christianity is a dramatic generalization and reduction. And so that is his take. I also have another book on Mithraism. Here I can share that with you. It's The Origins of Mithraic Mysteries, Cosmology and Salvation in the Ancient World. Let me see. Here is the link to that over on Amazon. So that is the other book I have. And then I have a book by Carl A.P. Ruck on mushrooms, Mithras, and mushrooms, mysteries, and Mithras, or something about the cult that civilized Europe. So that is on, again, inebriating substances, drug use within the Mithraic cult of the ancient period and how it influenced ancient Rome. So the reductionist arguments to say Christianity is Mithraism. Again, this would be the book, but this is a very expensive book. These are very, very academic books. That's why if anybody can find Attilio's book, From Jewish Magic to Gnosticism, a physical copy, I would greatly, greatly appreciate. To purchase, not just to, I can get the PDF and I could go get the book from the library. To own. I want to purchase the book. I cannot find it anywhere. And so if anybody can find that or point me in the right direction, I'd greatly appreciate it. Or if anybody has it and is willing to sell it, which I doubt, I'd be greatly, greatly interested. So Iswamus, I could go to the universities and I want to own a copy. So you can check out Interlibrary Loan System. Unless you can buy books there, I could go buy the PDF if I want to own a physical copy of this book. I cannot find a physical copy to purchase of this book. That's what I'm looking for. I can't find it anywhere. So anyways, thank you, Pim. I hope that answers. Sorry you got me ranting on Mithraism. I hope that works. And so, Pim, next super chat comes from 29R Pilot. Throws in $10, says, great show tonight. Well, thank you so much, 29 Pilot. I really appreciate it. God bless you and yours. Hope you're doing well. Keenan Beats, shout out to Keenan Beats. Keenan Beats throws in $20 for a super chat. No comment. Thank you so much, Keenan Beats. Hope you're doing well, brother. Again, shout out to Keenan, great musician. We're going to be doing a stream with Keenan, B-Dive, and Schema Beats, Ian from the Orthodox Logos here together to promote all the musicians that supported Church of the Eternal Logos. So shout out to Keenan Beats. Thanks for the $20, brother. Really appreciate that. No comment. Jared Fetzer throws in $5. Shout out to Jared Fetzer. Hope your family's doing good, brother. Shout out to you. He said, I love how Peterson admits the genius of the Bible and how incredible its psychological undertones are, and yet still entertain the thought that it is all insane. That is my opinion, the height of hubris. Exactly. And I think that's why, Peterson's true sort of redemptive hero's journey is until he adopts Christ, which is going to be a conquering of his own pride and ego of being this sort of secular psychological scholar. It's going to fall short, because how can he just keep using the Bible over and over and over to highlight all this profound insight and then yet not fully believe in it? It's the ultimate height of hubris. I totally agree with you, Jared Fetzer. Again, Jared Fetzer, shout out to him and his family, says, I love how Peterson admits the genius of the Bible and how incredible its psychological undertones are, and yet still entertain the thought that it is all insane. That is, in my opinion, the height of hubris. Absolutely could not agree more with you there. I absolutely cannot understand why Peterson is still sort of this agnostic, psychological, secular approach to the Bible kind of guy. So, yeah, it's mind-blowing. I hope, Jessica Wheeler says he is moving that direction. I hope so. God bless Peterson and his family. Hope everybody does well. Hope everybody stays safe and that they find Christ and become more public and proud about that articulation. The Green Feathers throws in $10. Thank you so much, the Green Feathers. Last super chat. The Green Feathers, thank you so much, brother. He says, have no fear of death, because Jesus is our King and our Creator. He loves us and overcame death. Absolutely. Thank you so much. The Green Feathers, you've been very generous, brother, in supporting the channel and the stream here. I really, really appreciate it. God bless you, brother. God bless your family. Hope everybody's doing well. Hope your arthritis is doing better. I know that can be really painful. So God bless you, the Green Feathers. And so that looks like that's all the super chat. So guys, please smash that like. I really, really appreciate everybody being here. Let me see if there's anything over on. Oh, we got a super chat over on The Rock. So shout out to Adam Infinitum over on Rockfin. Throws in $5 and says, greetings, amigo. I'm potentially interested in doing a personal consultation on setting up a live stream home studio similar to what you have. Is that something you'd be interested in? Adam Infinitum, absolutely, brother. Sign up. I would love to chat with that. Absolutely. So that we can absolutely dive into the setup and what all programs I use, maybe what you want to talk about, whatever. If you need some support, absolutely be interested. Would definitely appreciate it. So thank you so much, Adam Infinitum, for the $5 super chat. Again, says, greetings, amigo. I'm potentially interested in signing up, doing a personal consultation on setting up a live stream home studio similar to what you have. Is that something you'd be interested in? Absolutely, brother. So that looks like that is all the super chat. Special shout out to Adam Infinitum. Special shout out to Kingdom Kid. Special shout out to Pim Orsos. Special shout out to 29 our pilot. Special shout out to Keenan Beats and his incredible music and talent. Shout out to Jared Fetzer. Thank you so much, brother. And shout out to the Green Feathers. God bless you, man. I hope your arthritis is doing well. I hope you're feeling better. I know the weather's getting warmer. Maybe that should help. And then God bless your family, man. I hope everybody's doing well. So that looks like that really takes care of it. Guys, please smash that like. I would greatly appreciate everybody if you could smash that like and support the stream. I would really appreciate it. But that looks like that's going to take care of tonight's stream. I will be back either Wednesday or Friday. I'm not sure which day, but I got tons of stream topics. Again, today, I wasn't even sure I was going to stream about this, but then I felt like this is just what I needed to talk about. So I hope it was a useful stream. I hope people appreciated it. And again, if you guys would like to support Church of the Eternal Logos, please become a website member for $5 a month. I would greatly, 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 greatly appreciate that. That's the number one way you can support me. And then also, if you would be interested, like Adam Infinitum, for sign up for a one-on-one session, please do so with the following link. But that being said, guys, I'm going to hop out of here. Again, I'll be back Wednesday or Friday with a new stream. Until then, as always, God bless.